Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sire today. Take you on to the next part of our topic regarding the Western Front from the British perspective, life in the trenches, and an overview on the fighting on the Western Front that they experienced. As always, this is important to stress that there are, of course, a lesson catered towards the student level, and so the content is more an introduction to the key knowledge regarding the content on the Western Front from the British perspective, and so we'll also include some historical skills to practice as we go through it. We are historians after all, and so we should put our knowledge to the test as always. So notepads and pens at the ready. Let us carry on where we were in our session last week. So a quick, of course, reminder, we of course touched upon the general trench layout, what trenches were, and the general overview of what they were like. But of course, now we need the deeper context in the conflict. So it's important to remember what the situation was as we entered the end of 1914. We, of course, had the stalemate now set in place and these new trench systems becoming the norm as we entered the winter of 1914. So as we go into January 1915, pretty much the war movement was no more. And so we have many requests from people of what the next step is. The BAF's facing a lot of difficulty. It's still a relatively small force, but something has to be done. And so this man came up with an idea, this gentleman here in the image on the left, pointing straight at us, really demanding, mustache out, finger waggled directly at us. Who is he? Well, this is the British Army Field Marshal Lord Kitchener. He was a very experienced man in combat. He'd fought in places like India and particularly during the Second Boer War as well. This man here, he actually wrote a letter to the Commander-in-Chief, Sir John French, and he supposed that they must now recognise that the French army was not going to make the sufficient breakthrough despite the assistance from the British. It simply was not going to happen. And so, to actually force a retreat from the Germans and get them out of northern France and take back Belgium, they needed a new, stronger army. And so he set about bolstering and recruiting a new BEF, a new British Expeditionary Force. And so his goal was to form them from what's called PALS battalions. Why were they called PALS? Well, the whole promotional idea was that the men were going to fight with their friends, people they may have grown up in school with, they worked with, and of course had good relations with. They knew in and around their towns and villages. And this was quite a successful campaign, when very quickly about 1 million men were recruited into the PAL battalions and joined the war effort. Well, that was all good, but of course they needed equipment to wear and begin. The British Army did not yet have this. I will, of course, take you through the general overview of what they did have to wear, but it's important to remember when this army was created, they were average working civilians. They were your workers, they were the ones down the pub, they were the ones who played football on a Sunday. These men, many of them maybe hadn't held a rifle in their life, maybe no more than an air rifle, maybe had never even been in a fight. But all the same, they were the ones being recruited. They felt this just of national duty. As seen, there is some clear imagery that is being noted here in the image. We have the clear, clean military man in Kitchener. He wants you directly targeted to you as the person viewing it. It's for your country and God save the king. So two elements that are being touched upon here are your sense of national duty, that is for your country, your family, your friends you're going to be protecting, and God save the king. Whatever our opinions may be of the royal family in the modern times, back then patriotism and duty to the country was a massive thing. And so we should remember that when these young men, many between the ages of 19 and 30, were being drummed up, and some who were joining, it must be said illegally, under the age of 19, who may have looked a bit older, maybe more 15, 16, 17, but were convincing the recruitments that there's a real sense of duty there. They felt a purpose, they wanted to go and experience this adventure, this glorious chance to leave their nation, travel abroad, and have a good time with the friends that they knew. Well, what exactly were they going to wear? Well, let's have a look at the gentleman here on the right. What exactly is the standard kit for a British Army soldier when they got it? First and foremost was their steel helmet. Everyone had to have these. These were introduced in 1915. There initially was a bit of a problem with them. They actually glistened a bit in the sunlight, which made it easy for German marksmen and snipers to see them in the distance and have an easier shot. So, of course, they began to change them with Hessian sacking, and make them difficult to see and therefore avoid being shot at. They also, of course, had the general kit, the uniform. This here, although we can't see it on this image, was a khaki green tunic. It was worn over the long johns that were lowered down, and then a vest and heavy flannel shirt. The woolen uniform, it was soaked heavy up the damp, ideally meant to keep them warm, but also note how presentable it keeps them as well. They still look smart, still look pristine, still look like a soldier ready to fight. Although not on show in this image, soldiers also had a gas mask in a small respirator box in 1916. It was typically held in a canvas bag strapped to the chest. Can't really fully see it on this image, but it was essentially what they needed for a gas solution, which I'll discuss, of course, in my following points on gas attacks. And so in a filter box, it was made of charcoal, and the idea was that it was going to neutralize the chemicals trying to get into their body. And so actually, it also was given a flexible tube, so of course easy to breathe through, and of course easy to carry. And of course, every soldier must have their boots. They were typically black leather, and they had hard hobnailed soles, and they were steel toe caps. They of course had woolen puttees, and they were worn above the boot, as we can see here. Is to of course they're on rough terrain, that it's difficult to walk upon. They must stay smart, must stay strong, and travel through without much issue. And the final things we should talk about are what this gentleman here is holding. So the gentleman is holding a rifle. Well, it was a Mark III short magazine Lee Enfield rifle. They were made in 1903, and the magazine typically contained 10 rounds of ammunition. The bullet was quite powerful. It actually could infamously penetrate 18 inches of oak at a distance of 200 yards and could fire quite accurately up to 800, 1,000 yards as well. They were the standard rifle to use. Every good marksman must and did have one. It was quite customary for the soldiers to be trained in the mad or the hot minute, which is essentially a training exercise where they had to fire accurately all rounds they had in their rifle and aim to get them all expended in under 1 minute. The best ones that could do that were indeed considered the sharpshooters, the marksmen of the units. And the final part here is what's attached to the rifle. This here is a long 17-inch sworded blade dubbed a bayonet. The idea was they would attach it to the end of the rifle out here, and then they would hold it out and they were charging at the enemy to, of course, stab them and skewer them. The idea was they would strike it in, they'd get them on the ground, twist it out, and the enemy would be taken down and killed. That's the general overview of what the soldiers had to wear, what their typical gear was. But again, remember, many soldiers, when they first joined, did not have all this equipment straight away. They were training with sticks and so forth, not rifles. They were training in their own civilian clothes. And so a very different picture of what being drafted for them. And there we are. That's our introduction to the PAL battalions and the equipment the British soldiers would be fighting with in the conflict. I hope you found this useful. I hope you found it insightful. As always, in the next lesson, we'll consider the actual fighting now that the soldiers took part in and go into a deep dive of the technology they had as well, beyond their rifles, beyond their khakis and their uniforms, and discover some more details of what exactly fighting in the trenches was like. Because you think, after all, we now know what the trenches were. We now know what our soldiers had when they were fighting in it. But now we need to understand the true, full experience. What was it like in the trenches for the British? This has been History with Sire. Hope you found this useful, as always, and insightful. Look forward to seeing you in my class again. Thank you for listening.